Welcome to What Drives You with your host, Mike Gourdet. Human solution consultant from Seattle, Washington. It is now time to sit back, buckle up for the show that drives the asking question of what drives you. And now your host, Mike Gourdet.
Welcome to What Drives You, the show about why we do the things we do. This is the first of the year. This is the first show of the year. Happy New Year, everybody. And to start off this brand new year of 2021, we're going to talk about some serious things. We're going to have our interview with Dawn Nardi, who's going to talk about domestic violence. So for those of you who might experience a little emotional response from that, be warned. She's a survivor, and she will talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to talk about depression and a new study that came out just recently from the British Psychological Society about a new theory about what that means. And then we're going to do our question of the day. So stick with us. We'll be right back with our interview. Thank you. Thank you for joining us for this week's episode. I am with Dawn Nardi, who is joining us from Massachusetts. Hi, Dawn. How are you?
Hi, Mike. I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a single mom of 4, and I have 3 young children living with me at home. I used to work for a nonprofit for 25 years in the housing and homeless arena. And now I work in the private sector in human resources.
Okay. All right. And how is COVID treating you this year?
Well, it's interesting because we had a situation where our sort of toxic verbal environment turned physical in October, and we then had to flee the home with my children, and in doing so started a series of events. And what ended up happening was legally returned with a vacate and a restraining order, only to be then evicted by the landlord a few months later. So we literally moved in February, and then the lockdown and the COVID restrictions happened in March. So anything from COVID on has actually been a blessing and a better year for us than what 2019 was.
Okay, so that's a story in and of itself, right? Because most of us are suffering from adverse effects of COVID, which sort of gets into the question about we've already talked a little bit and you've hit on some things. What is it that you're passionate about getting out right now?
So like I said, in October, we had about a year's worth of verbal and toxic environment sort of bubble up into this physical domestic violence situation at the home. And what I ended up doing was realizing that at that moment, we had to get out of the home. Like it was only going to get worse. I didn't know what to expect. I had my children put their shoes on, and we literally left. So at that time, just knowing that as I was going through the motions of going to court, going to the women's center, going to the schools, talking to the schools and the social workers. It was close to Christmas, so we talked to some agencies and other folks. And as I was going along, every single person I ran into, whether if it was my dental hygienist, whether if it was someone at the women's center, whether if it was the police officer that took the report, they all had a story. They all had a story, and it was all similar. And I couldn't wrap my head around it at the time, but now I think, there's so much of that happens that doesn't get reported. And people, and I know for myself, I moved, like I said, when COVID hit, and I was just in this deep, dark fog.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the darkest place I've ever been in my life. And because of COVID, because of not being able to do anything else but surf the web and kind of, check the internet resources and things like that, I stumbled upon personal development, started doing some internal work, and several months later started attending, like paid summits and folks who have already their business in plan and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. And I was thinking to myself how much of a mistake it was for me to be there. But intentionally, I was there for a reason. I was there because this is my way of being able to help people. This is going to be my way of turning my mess into a message.
Okay.
And, having that capability to say, my story doesn't end like this, is so powerful. And for people who go through that situation and feel abused, and whether if it's verbal, whether if it's physical, whether if it's both, whether if it's a month, whether if it's a year, whether if it's 10 years, it's the hardest thing to come back from,
Mm-hmm.
because you shut yourself down.
Right. So you talk about from mess to message, right? That's kind of a key component to part of the way we do our business. And it sounds like you are creating a business. Have you created a business, or are you creating a business? Because I know you said you worked in HR, which is your normal job, and I'm
Yes.
guessing I'm guessing that there's not a whole lot of passion there. Maybe there is, I don't know, but it doesn't have the driving force that this piece does, right?
Right. Right. I help people with, payroll, benefits, things like that. This is helping people on such a larger scale. This is helping people not only, like I said, get that message across, get that message out to the world, and build more unity, build more peace, build more love, but also building self-love, self-healing, um, that, that self-empowerment piece of it. It's just, it's immeasurable, and it's so needed.
And how are you going about delivering that message?
Right now I'm just making connections on Facebook. I'm organically just myself. I just want to support people as much as I can at this point in my life. I feel like I've been able to transform myself intentionally by changing habits, changing my thoughts, changing my beliefs, changing my behaviors and my actions. I'm not 100% there. I mean, are we ever?
Mm-mm.
But, I'm still learning every day. And I just think, that I could help someone who's still in that deep, dark fog,
Mm-hmm.
who's not even ready to see that there's a light. And I think
Right.
that's the hardest part, was I wasn't able to even see that there was a light anywhere. Like, you just get so stuck in that space.
Yes. Yes. That's one of my primary motivators myself, is knowing that and having been there myself, and helping people, not in the same situation, but you know what I mean. Uh, what do you think drives that? I know it's an odd question to ask when you're saying that this is what I'm doing, but what do you think is driving that?
Well, I think for me, it's my children.
Mm-hmm.
It's my children, and it's my children's children, and it's their children. And I want to break from that norm, that thing that, we can all live with this. We can all just, kind of shuffle it under the rug. We can all, just get away with it. Um, once we realize that that shouldn't be acceptable behavior, and once we realize that we do have the power, we have everything we need inside of us already.
Right.
We really have everything we need inside of us. We just need to acknowledge it, realize it's there, and tap into it, and then be our best selves. That's what I'm working on now. And I feel like once other people get to that point, you won't settle for that behavior. You won't accept that behavior. You won't even attract that behavior anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a way to shift sort of the paradigm, the norm of what's happening, and the acceptance that, like I said, when I was going through it, I had, someone who I met online in a marketplace, and I was thanking them because our Christmas was difficult and this is why. And they were like, I understand, we went through the same situation. And I was like, okay, and it's just so prevalent out there. And it really is just trying to set up this new self-love, self-healing, self-empowerment, new behaviors, and make sure that my children are going to grow up in a better world, and that their children are going to grow up in a better world. And then it's going to continue, and it's going to continue, and we're going to make an impact.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what drives me. I want to make an impact on the world. I want to take those derogatory, negative words that are used in verbal abuse and turn them in a positive way. Like, how can we empower ourselves to not even feel that burn when you get called something, and I just think that being able to remove yourself from the situation, hurt people. So once you're able to remove yourself from the situation, it's a little easier to process it.
Yes.
Because you can't process it when you're in the situation unless you have that mindset to say, they're just doing this because I'm physically in front of them. I'm the target. I'm not necessarily the focus of their pain, the focus of their anger, but because I'm here and because of what's happening, I'm just going to be the brunt of this. So I think just making an impact is what drives me. It really does. I want this world, especially now with what I've seen in 2020, we need so much more love. We need so much more peace, more tolerance, more unity. We're all one big family, and, Zoom has proved we're all one small world.
Yes.
So I think, being able to harness that and just grow and continue that is really what's going to help us in the long run. Is we're going to be able to impact the world.
Okay. And this is a tough topic. Like some of the other topics that I've talked to others about, it's uncomfortable for people who are in it. It's uncomfortable for people who are not in it. What do you see yourself doing to help alleviate some of that discomfort? You may not have, your business plan in place or anything, but what do you think you're going to do, if you don't mind my asking?
So the first thing I'm going to do is create a support network. Okay. And by doing that, harnessing some of the resources that are available. I would not have been where I am today had it not have been for tapping into federal resources, women's center programs. And I was in nonprofit for 25 years, and I knew those programs existed, but when it happened to me, I was like a deer in headlights.
Right.
So I didn't know what to do. I wasn't even thinking clearly. I was homeless for 10 days with my kids bouncing off of couches of family members. And I already had all that information, but I just couldn't think of it. I couldn't tap into it.
Yeah,
It took,
you were too busy
yeah,
surviving.
exactly. And trying to figure out, like, I'm still going to work, they're still going to school, we're staying at this person's house, like, making sure we all have clothes, food, things like that. One thing, um, I think with all of that too is, just the fact that it was October. It was Domestic Violence Awareness Month.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, I was driving and I heard one of the commercials, and it had the hotline, the 1-800 hotline number. And I called it. And then I did a lot of research and I found the closest women's center. And then I was able to go to court and get the, restraining order and meet with the advocate and the vacate order and that whole process. And if I can help someone, because I remember crying in that courtroom, I remember just feeling like, how did this even happen? Why did this even happen? Like, you kind of see it building up, but you never expect it to happen.
Right.
You never kind of say, I just knew it wasn't working. I just knew it wasn't working. And we just needed to be in separate locations. So I was planning on moving out already. We had all our stuff in storage. But when it happened, I still got caught like a deer in headlights. I wasn't sure what I was going to do next. Now looking back and seeing how far I've come, how strong I've been, how resilient I've been through this whole process, I want to make sure I can do that for someone else. I want to make sure that as I'm going through my own fire, I have those buckets of water to throw at that so that I can help those folks get through. To me, if I had that, that's what I would want, is what I wanted back then. I wanted somebody to kind of walk me through, help me through, realize my worth. That's the biggest part of all this. Once I got out of my own way and realized my self-worth and realized that my mess had a message in it, it's been amazing. It's been, I can't, there's no description to that. It's just, and to have these folks and constantly kind of cheerleading me along. I want to be someone's cheerleader. I want to be that cheerleader for them so they can believe in themselves again. They can take that hopelessness and turn it into hope. They can take that dark and turn it into light. I mean, it's all about being love and light as we move forward. And I just want people to be able to tap into that.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. I know it's even though you have this mission, I'm pretty sure it's still difficult to talk about it. But it's great that you're trying to turn that into a positive rather than sinking back into the negative that a lot of people still do. It's
Right.
It's a hard thing. So that's about it for our time. Is there any thoughts you would like to leave with us before we cut off for the day?
I mean, if anyone out there really is struggling with this, or if they feel like they're in that deep fog, in that darkness, or they're even trying to get out, just send me a Facebook request. I will certainly answer a message, anything like that. Just reach out. I will be creating a Facebook group in the near future. So I'm hoping to kind of create that network where we can all kind of build on each other and help each other through this process.
Okay.
You're not alone.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. Good luck on your mission. It's
Thank you so
definitely,
much.
yeah, it's definitely a worthwhile and necessary, unfortunately, thing that needs to happen. Uh, anyway, thanks again. And thank you all for listening. I know that might have been a difficult topic for some of you. If you do, please reach out. And we're going to end off by saying thanks again, Dawn. Have a great day. Stay tuned for our next segment. Thank you. And thanks again, Dawn, for joining us today. Today I'm going to be talking a little. I'm going to go off track from what I have been doing and talk a little bit about an article that came out, a new study by the British Psychological Society talking about depression. And the reason why I'm talking about this is there's a problem. Okay. Depression is thought of as an illness. And one of the reasons why it's thought of as an illness, or one of the practical reasons why it's thought of as an illness, is it helps insurance companies pay for treatment. So that's one of the primary things. But what I'm talking about today is this study that came out from the British Psychological Society that talks about depression as a survival mechanism. And that's a little bit different from an illness. And I'll go into a little bit about that later. But the crux of this study, and this is something that's sort of new in the realm of psychology, basically due to the new studies in neuroscience. And it comes through us via what's called polyvagal theory. That is a theory that's based on the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system as driven by the vagal nerves in the body. And I'm not going to get too technically into that because it gets really complicated really quickly. But the crux of this theory, the study, is that depression is actually a survival response. And it's not an illness. The current understanding of depression as an illness is something that it starts in the mind, and it starts by distorted thinking patterns. And then it creates symptoms in the body like exhaustion, stomach aches, things like that. And that we have this downturn in our mental health, which can be cured by drugs or treated with drugs. What this new study is suggesting is that it's not exactly that manner. What it is suggesting is that it's a physiological response to external stimuli, which creates a survival response that over time leads to a condition called immobilization. And again, this is pretty complicated, so I'm just going to try and do this on a high level. The idea here is that when we activate the limbic system, or the survival system in the brain, we've talked about this in previous episodes, you lose executive functioning and you go into survival mode. And most people know this as fight or flight. These are primal instincts: fight, flight, and then there's other ones. There's freeze, faint, inflate, and fornicate. And that represents one of the interesting responses. Like in wartime, you always see increases in birth rates, and that's a survival mechanism. We often don't think of the other ones: freeze, faint, or inflate. Freeze is just becoming stock still and not moving. Faint, of course, is like the possum that plays dead. And inflate means you get bigger to ward off the danger. So these are common ideas of the survival response as we conceptualize it in the fight or flight system. There are other names for this, like defense mechanism cascade or defense cascade. Um, but what this theory is suggesting is that depression is actually a prolonged system of engaging the sympathetic nervous system over time, which leads to what is called immobilization. And immobilization is a kind of conglomeration of the freeze or faint system, meaning that the depressed person starts withdrawing from their normal activities because those are becoming representative of dangers. And in order to stay safe, they create a more or less suppressed system. And again, depression is not an easy subject to understand and to think about and talk about. There's a lot of different problems with these things. You know, there's a lot of psychological evidence that depression is suppression of anger. There's a lot of ideas of it being a chemical imbalance in the brain if you go from the purely medical side. And then there's the social stigma of people with depression and not understanding what it is. So what this theory is suggesting again is that this is a survival response based on this polyvagal theory, which is something that is fairly new and is not widely accepted yet, at least. But it makes sense. If you think about this, everything that we do during our day is a survival response. When I get thirsty and take a drink, that is my survival system. It says we need hydration. So it sends a signal to my brain that it interprets as thirst, and then I drink. So it's very simple. And we tend to get a little weird when we start talking about these things, like fear and things like that, because there's a lot of negative connotations associated with fear. But we have to remember that these things are what has created our society. It has created us and this is exactly the reason why we're here. So fear is not a bad thing in and of itself. Fear is something that exists to help us survive. So what happens when we have this prolonged exposure to stimulus which we find threatening? Well, we have a survival system that's constantly trying to adapt, and one of those ways it adapts is by immobilizing. Immobilizing is basically shutting down the systems that create the threat or perceived threats that we are dealing with. Learned helplessness is a way of doing this. Now, if you've ever heard of these experiments, they might be very disturbing to you, but this is one of the ways that people postulated and theorized about what learned helplessness was by creating these very nasty experiments on monkeys and cats and other animals, which puts them in a place where whatever they do, they get shocked. So, for instance, I think the cat experiment was, well, you know, I don't want to go there because it's kind of gross. But the monkey experiment was these charged plates in the cage, which were color coded, I think, and they could be individually electrically charged so that it shocked the animal that was in the cage. So whenever the red square was energized, the animal learned that the other 3 squares were safe, so it avoided that red square. And then subsequently, each other square would force it into the next square and then the next square. And then when all of the squares were electrified and the creature could not escape the pain, it would do some things that were self-injurious and became immobile. And one of the ideas behind this immobilization is it sort of takes our consciousness away from the pain. And that's what this idea of depression as a survival response is based around, is that in order to deal with these constant perceived psychological or physical threats, the limbic system is activated and it continues to activate, and we immobilize, and it disconnects us from the issue, which can explain a lot, actually, if we look at it from that perspective, because it's always kind of a curious thing how people respond to different stimulus. And I don't know how you feel about this. And I think and again, this is just a new study. There's obviously going to be more studies out there about that. But if you're interested in it, there's an article in Psychology Today, which talks a little bit about it, gives you some examples, and talks about polyvagal theory and why this is something that might be important. One of the biggest takeaways from this is, if we identify depression as a survival mechanism rather than an illness, we're going to reduce some of the shame that comes with the social context of these issues. So think about that. If you have any questions, let me know. But I wanted to present that because this is something that I talk about often anyway, and it's not that I don't discount other theories. It's just that I tend to think in these terms. And one of my first responses upon seeing the headline was, well, yeah, that seems correct, because again, if we really pay attention to how we go about our day, the choices that we make are based out of this very basic survival response. Very basic. And it's not that we get entirely energized about it. It's that this is how we make choices. If I'm going to go exercise today, my brain weighs the pros and cons in the unconscious about whether or not it's going to be more painful to me to do it or more beneficial. And if it's going to be more painful, can I compare that with the pain of my sitting around and doing nothing, which is nice, or the pain of what the consequences are for not going to exercise, which is continued unhealth or whatever. And we go through these processes unconsciously, all these little tick marks going down the line, and then we decide whether or not we can muster that energy to go to the gym. So it's very complex. It's very out there, but I tend to go in this direction naturally just because of the way I studied human behavior. So if it's of interest of you, take a look at it. Again, it's on Psychology Today. I'm sure you can find it in other places. I would really be interested in your thoughts about this. So, start a discussion. We'll be right back with the question of the day. Stick around. And we're back. And today's question of the day comes from Paul. And he asked, why are people refusing the COVID-19 vaccine? Okay, so we all know that the vaccine has come out. There are different phases for getting the vaccine, and a lot of people are refusing to take the vaccine. Now, obviously, we know why. It's frightening. it's uncertain. We don't deal well with uncertainty. And the way the human mind works, or the way the brain works, is that we make decisions based on emotional reactions, and then we justify those reactions with our thinking brain, or our prefrontal cortex. So the way we make decisions is emotion first, justify with logic. And sometimes that logic is completely sound, and sometimes it doesn't seem like that logic is sound at all. But again, we are looking at that from a perspective of how we should be doing it, or how we would be doing it. And when we do that through that lens of egoism, uh, we start to externalize our answers onto other people, which is called projection. Obviously, this is a very touchy subject. And a lot of the fears are around, okay, first off, are the vaccines truly ready to be used? They didn't follow the normal protocol, which takes years. Why would I want to expose myself to COVID-19 because when I get a flu shot, I get sick? And then there's other ones, like if I take the vaccine, I have to actually acknowledge that COVID-19 exists. So I might be a COVID-19 denier, and I'm definitely not going to get one because that's contrary evidence to what my belief is. And that, again, there's confirmation bias there. If I believe that COVID-19 exists, I am definitely not going to pay attention to anything that suggests that it does, including something that can ultimately help me. You see how that works? See how this is all bizarre. All this bizarre behavior makes sense when you start peeling back the reasons why people are doing things. So there's a lot of uncertainty about all of this, and it takes and all these answers, or all these ideas, are taking it from everywhere we can get it. It takes it from our personal beliefs about the pandemic. It takes into account the social aspects of the pandemic, the various opinions about the pandemic, and the various opinions about vaccines, and the various opinions about medical models versus spiritual models, and so we are taking this gobs and gobs of information, and we're trying to sort through it. And because there's so much of it, it creates more uncertainty, and we don't know what to do. That's why sometimes it's very difficult for persons to make a decision, especially persons that tend to be anxious, because they are trying to look at this as a mountain that they have to climb, and they don't have any shoes. So it may seem like on the surface that it's logical, normal, and natural that you would take your vaccine. But when we open up the human behavior can and all the worms come out, we can see that it's not an easy decision. These are not easy decisions. And when we are saying, I can't understand why, well, that's why. It's taking yourself out of the picture, looking at it from an objective point of view, and trying to understand what factors may be involved in that person making the decision to refuse something that is helpful to everybody involved, despite what all the evidence says. I'm sorry I can't give you a clear answer, except to say that this is all based in uncertainty, and all of us are trying to navigate this uncertainty through our own skill sets and values and lenses. I know it's hard to give grace to certain things. I know it's hard not to get angry at people for doing things that we think are completely illogical. That again is the human condition. That's why we have disagreements. That's why we have laws. That's why we have wars. That's why we have conflict. And if we can change anything, it would be trying to understand how we get to these points of contention and learn how to diffuse them instead of violently going out and doing something about it. That would be the peaceful way of doing it. So, Paul, I hope that helps a little bit. I hope that regardless of how you feel about it, you can see why, and maybe that will help you understand. And by understanding, you then can regulate your emotions a little bit better. So that's it. I hope the show wasn't too much of a downer for the first of this year. If you have any questions, please contact me at mike@whatdrivesyou.net. Have a safe and great start of the year. Bye-bye.